Welcome back, looters. This is episode 3, which is about prototyping. You already have your concept for your board game, and you sort of have an idea about what you want to make, presumably mechanics, but you don't necessarily have to have that quite yet, but you have some sort of idea about what you're doing. So then the next step is to prototype. And what is prototyping is sort of the having it in your hands, being able to play your idea. Whether or not it's done does not matter. That is not the purpose of a prototype.
And I want to make something really clear. Odds are good for one game you will have multiple versions of the prototype.
Yeah.
And I don't just mean even alpha and then beta. I mean in the context that you'll try it once and then you'll realize this paper's getting a little flimsy and maybe we need a more solid version, and you'll iterate through it a lot.
Right. So a lot of times there are terms that people will use with prototypes. So like, oh yeah, this is my prototype, but it's in alpha. Yeah. And what alpha means is like, this is the most raw form of my game. It is, it may not be that it hasn't been tested, but it's, I like to use the term unstable. It may not hold together as a game. You might be able to mechanically break it just by playing it. And that's normally for the first sort of phase or chunk of when you are testing it. We're not doing testing yet. That's going to be the next week, next episode. But alpha prototype is like, I've just put this together. I don't know if everything works. And then once you get through that, then normally they would call that a beta.
Yeah, and one thing with the alpha is that also pieces don't matter as much. Yeah. As in, like, right now it's dice. In the end, it may be cards, but just the concept of some mechanism for randomization or something. In other words, the actual delivery of the piece also doesn't matter. For right now, we're just trying to see if
this randomization
fits in.
Right.
Or I'm just trying to have a randomization. Really, all we're testing right now is the concept of having cards.
Right.
And you just need some way of having a random element. So for right now, it's dice. It won't be dice in the end. Right now, it's dice. This doesn't matter. Right now, we're just testing
focusing on this other
thing. And so that's the other half of alpha is a lot of times when you do alpha, you actually have to state that so people don't sit there and focus on the dice that won't be in the game in the end anyway.
And actually, we'll have a question asked about when do you want to show your prototype to different kinds of people. And normally alpha is meant only for you and maybe other board game designers that you know, or other people who know about the life of your game so that they aren't focused on things that you are worried about. Because normally in alpha, it's like the building blocks of your game. So like, I just am worried about buying things from this market, or I'm just worried about moving from A to B. I don't care about any of the other stuff.
And in fact, sometimes it'll be, right now, all we know about is the market.
Right.
So consequently, I don't know how you got to the market, and I don't know what's going to happen after the market, but right now we're just focusing on
So
this.
A lot of times with prototypes in alpha, you're also only going to be, remember how I said earlier about having chunks. You're going to be working in different pieces. Don't worry about piece A yet. You're only focused on piece B. Yeah. And then you'll try and smush them together at some point. So that's sort of alpha. Beta is when the game, I would say, is stable. Yes. You can play a full game of it without worrying about, oh, well, this character got stuck in this part of the board and now can't get to the market to buy cards. So everything works, it's just not necessarily polished yet.
Yeah.
And then whatever you want to call the version of your prototype when it is completely shelf stable and you just are working on graphic design, I tend to call that like preprint. I don't know what you call it.
Yeah.
Different people, I think, call it different things.
And that's an interesting delineation there is you often will have it out and letting people play it. And I don't mean just like you and just your close people. I mean like you'll actually have other people trying your game out and stuff at beta.
Right.
So
to get ideas about whether it's done or not.
Yeah, and to get a sense of how much people like it, or if everybody's like, the market sucks, and you're like, I guess I'm going back to alpha and getting rid of the market.
Yeah. A lot of times it'll kind of go in a life cycle.
Yeah, it does have a life cycle.
Of like different pieces getting tweaked and stuff, and things that you thought were good, people just don't like, and so do you keep that and you fix another issue to make that part better, or do you just scrap that and put it back on your shelf and replace it with something else, or just get rid of it altogether? Yeah. And so that's sort of the life cycle of a game as alpha, beta, and you kind of go back and forth between those. Normally you just kind of stay in beta for a really, really, really long time, and then when you're done, which is a very loose term because game designers are notorious. It's kind of like being a writer where you're never really done. You're just ready to go to print. And so whenever...
Publisher called. It's time to go.
Time to go. And so there's also done, which is, I don't know what we want to call that, pre-print, pre-publish. Yeah. When you're basically done and you're just focusing on how your player is intaking the way that the game is and making it graphically ready.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the stages of your prototype. But I hear you ask, that doesn't tell me how to make a prototype. I like to use the what do I have in my desk method of making a prototype, where as you make more and more board games, you will amass more and more random things. But I have a list. Here are some of the things that we use. Cards of any kind. We typically use Magic cards because they are very cheap and you can buy them in bulk. But if you happen to have a lot of just like poker cards laying around, that's fine too. Normally what we do is we take the card and you put it into what they call a penny sleeve. It's like a sleeve for your card that you just slide it in, and penny sleeves cost 1 cent per sleeve. You buy them typically in packs of 100. So a pack of 100 cost $1. And then you can just put slips of paper in the sleeve and you can just switch them out. And so it's a really easy way of changing what you want your card to say without having to like white out the card or write on it in marker or something like that.
Yep.
Basically any kind of card. You can also buy blank cards, but it would generally be a little bit more expensive unless you can buy them en masse. So basically just any kind of card you have if you want to have cards in your game. You can pull apart old board games that you either have or you buy from Goodwill. We're not doing garage sales at this point in time, but garage sales, estate sales, whatever. You can buy blank dice online and then use stickers, and that way you can have really, if you want unique dice in your game, you can have whatever kind of sides on the dice you want and can just peel off stickers and put new ones on.
Yep.
Index cards also make really good prototyping cards if you don't want to invest in penny sleeves and other kinds of cards, or if you want to have something that's a little bit just like a different feel to it. Scrap cardboard and glue sticks we use a lot of. If you have like tiles or pieces that need to be a little bit heavier than a card, what we were told was actually if you have like drink carriers that are made out of that like really lightweight cardboard, ripping those apart and then you can just like write on them or put like paper down on top of them, it works really well.
It's called recycling.
Or poster board. You can go to like a dollar store or something, craft store, and get poster board and cut that up, and that way you can have really big pieces. Scissors, absolutely a necessity. Pencils, pens, markers, whatever kind of things you want. And if you're really cool, you can invest in like a white erase board, or they make board game boards that have like a white erase top to them, and that way you can like map out a board and keep it for a little bit and then erase it just as you go.
And those ones usually come two-sided, so one side is little hexes.
Yeah, the
like
ones we
honeycombs,
bought are hexes
and
on one
one
side.
side
and
is squares.
But there are some that have squares on both sides. There are some that are blank on one side, so that you can make whatever. So it basically, I would say, if you want to invest money in things that are reusable, if you want to invest things that are reusable, think about things that you can use multiple times, or are things that you will get rid of really quickly.
What I also find myself doing is I find that I'll go someplace like a dollar kind of store.
You go to the craft store and you buy a lot of random stuff.
And I just buy random stuff. And the thing is, it's stuff I could get a lot of cheap and I think would work well as pieces in some sort of a game. And so I end up with lots of random stuff, but it ends up being stuff that I think later I'll be able to...
Sometimes it isn't. You like buying stickers for that
I love buying
purpose,
stickers.
too.
Stickers are great. I buy lots of stickers.
There's also a lot of online resources if you don't really want to spend a lot of money or don't want to have a lot of clutter in your house like Carrie. Tabletop Simulator is a good one that a lot of people use. There's also, I want to say, Tabletopia is another one that you can look into that you can prototype and not spend any money past the cost of the program.
And there's also, you can, on like Game Crafter, you can buy individual pieces and have them ship you individual pieces. The other thing you can do is they can print for you like one version of your item. So you could just say, I want...
That's at the end.
Well, I know,
but yeah. Yeah, so there are places you'll generally spend a little bit more per item. So if there's like a specific colored gem of a specific shape you want, there's Game Crafter, there's Board Game Geek has their own store. There's a couple of different online stores just meant for board game pieces, and you can get very specific pieces. But I would warn you, if you are in alpha or even early beta, your game will keep changing, and you probably shouldn't invest in anything very substantially unique until you're near the end, where you know that your game isn't going to be changing a lot anymore.
Right. But once you hit that point where your game isn't going to be changing a lot, it's good to have, even if like the answer was, I just need 6 meeples of different colors. It's good to go ahead and buy those 6 meeples, even if it costs you a little more money, because having something that isn't as fragile.
Yeah.
When you're
it's
actually
made out of cardboard or paper
that you can take to places and show it around to people, it's a little bit of an investment, but in the end it will help. And remember,
and it doesn't have to be.
It's not final. It's just.
It doesn't have to be completely unique, but something that is a little bit more substantial than a piece of paper.
A piece of paper.
Piece of paper is for alpha. Something slightly more unique, but that you probably just have laying around, or something that's easy to obtain, would be for beta. And then once you get into that preprint phase, going and looking more specifically at what exact components, which is not what we're talking about today, but yeah, I would say that is like at the very end when you're thinking about, what do I want this specific piece to look like, and how does that affect how the player interprets this piece in the game. So, what's the fastest way to make a prototype?
Oh, I make them all the time. The answer is a piece of paper and a pencil, and you just...
Yeah. I would say that, kind of like what we were talking about, do it in parts. So, if you know that for sure you want your game to be focused on a marketplace, make the marketplace first, and let the rest of the design sort of influence. How do you get to the marketplace? Do you already start there? Do you need to go someplace after that? Is that going to be basically the board? And sort of let each piece influence the rest of the design.
One of the things that happens when we play, also in alpha, is a lot of times you'll come over with some sort of pieces of paper that is your alpha of the marketplace.
I like paper.
As our marketplace example. And once we're done having the conversation, we'll start talking about what could have happened before, or where, in other words, these pieces don't exist right now, but are you thinking about having us have this other thing,
Right.
these other mechanics?
Do you need to take things here?
Do you need
or...
to take, how would that work? And the thing is, sometimes we'll be like, well, let's grab a piece of paper and let's see how that would,
Yeah.
It's like, it's,
You're playing through the game as you're making it.
In a discussion kind of process.
Yeah, and I would say that is very true too for games that have a lot of cards. What we typically do is we will make about a third, maybe a half, and then we'll kind of start playing through it really roughly.
Yeah.
And with Candy Squad, we knew we needed or wanted items, but we didn't necessarily know what all the items would be, and so we literally would shuffle together the blank cards and then the cards that we knew we wanted. And if we drew a blank one, you would ask me and you would say, what do you want this one to do? And I would be like, well, right now I'd really like something to give me extra attack or something to give me extra candy. And so we would literally just sort of write them down as we went for alpha and let that sort of guide where the player discussion went, because it sort of was like, I want this right now, let's make a card that does that.
And while we were playing in alpha, there was a lot of just pretending like things did certain things. Now, understand...
Do a lot of pretending. Use your imagination.
This
It's
is
okay.
an imagination-based game. Now, but what would happen is between that play and the next time you came over, the cards we talked about would get made.
Yes. I would sort of think about the
final and they would sometimes
product
actually be different. So in other words, before it was a card that gave you more candy. Now it's a card that gives you more candy but also penalizes you in some way.
Right. Or gives you lots of candy but you have to do a specific task.
So it's not that it came back and it was the exact same card. It was like Wing was iterating through it again one more time, and as she thought about it as she wrote it.
Yeah. Normally what I would do is the card would start out and be like, this card will give you 2 candy. But that's really boring.
Yeah.
And so I would I would try to make it more interesting. So like, let's take this card and make it give you a lot of candy, but you have to defeat a villain first. Or you can get a lot of candy, but at the expense of not being able to move as far, and using the theme of the game to sort of, like, what would this item practically do if we were in this world?
Yeah.
To make it, to really just to make it more interesting and make it more fun to play.
Yeah. And so the important thing at the time while we were doing it was just in the concept of we're just seeing how that mechanic runs. Later, once it gets to the more solidified version, then it was, now we need to actually figure out how it actually...
And make sure
it actually works. And
make sure each of the cards is balanced with the
cost.
And all the boring stuff. Right, so that's the... Circling back to what the original question was, the fastest way to make a prototype, I would say break it into small chunks and sort of let it be produced as you go. Don't feel like you have to make the entire game just to be able to play it, because chances are you're going to be ripping apart those pieces anyway. Don't worry about it.
Exactly.
All right, the next question is, how do you prototype something if it's a large gimmick or difficult to manufacture? Meaning, if we're talking about your game that has the clock in the middle and the tidal waves
and turning it, and it's...
How would you prototype something that's really large and you can't make out of just paper and cardboard? How would you test that in a prototype, an initial alpha prototype?
So, I think 2 things.
Mm-hmm.
Number 1 is I would actually spend a lot of time trying to derive how that would
what it would do,
and how would it mechanically work. But and in which case, then eventually, once I figure out its gears or whatever and start actually doing it. But the other half of what I would have to say to myself at the same time and have to explain to you is, what am I actually trying to get out of this? Right. So in other words, in the end, it may be the same concept of being a tidal wave, but what I'm really trying to get out of it is the concept of everything shifting. Right. Well, maybe there's other ways of shifting everything. It doesn't have a clock in the middle. That doesn't
it has the clock, but it doesn't need to move
or something.
Yeah.
In other words, what am I trying to actually get out of this gimmick that isn't just, I just wanted to have a spinny gimmick?
Right.
Is it a lazy Susan in the middle? I mean, what is the gimmick for?
Right. So my answer would be very similar, taking what it's trying to accomplish
yes.
and testing that component on its own.
Yeah.
So if you have, say, I have a prototype that I'm working on that I'm not going to mention the name of just in case.
We actually do it?
That has a color changing mechanic where it goes
I
from
love that. Oh, I know
where it goes from red to blue.
I know what you're
and so different things will show up. And if that's the case, how do you test it? And the answer is you just pretend. We go back to using our imagination.
All pretend.
You fake it until you make it, literally, until you produce it. So I would write both those colors down, and if we're in blue, only look at the blue, and if we're in red, only look at the red, and pretend like you don't see the other one. And it's not pretty. It doesn't work great, but for alpha, you don't care if it's pretty or if it works great. You just care that it is viable.
Yes.
And once it's viable, then you can worry about, all right, now how do I actually
prototype this thing?
And the answer might be that it doesn't work. But at least you haven't put a lot of time, effort, and money into it at that point. And then if it does kind of work, maybe you can push it off onto someone else who is better at that kind of thing, who knows a lot about manufacturing clock things or light things. So yeah, I would say just make sure that it's viable by pretending. And who knows, the clock thing, like you said, it might not actually be a mechanical clock that actually moves everything. Maybe it's a round piece on your board that you move around in like a rondel, but then you physically just like push pieces around the board yourself. And it's not nearly as cool, but also it would not be impossible to produce then.
Yeah, because there's that too.
Because if you want it to go to mass market, it needs to be something you can produce in quantity.
And not just so it has to be producible in quantities at a price point people will pay for it.
Right, because normally you're going to be looking at 6 or 7 times, at least 5 times, up to about 7 times the manufacturing cost. If a game costs you $12 to produce it, you're going to be selling it for $70 maybe, and that's not including shipping if you're doing Kickstarter. And so are people willing to pay that amount of money? Because if a game costs $20, you're selling a game for well over $100 at that point, and it better be made out of solid gold or have 1,000 miniatures in it for people to warrant paying that. Although at this point, people will be paying $100 for a really cool looking game. That's not unheard of.
No.
But it needs to warrant that price point because so many games are coming out these days. Like what? And if you're a first-time game designer, oh my god, like what are you doing that is making this game worth $120 retail? So yeah, just break it down. Make sure that you can test everything before you spend a lot of money on it. Is really just where we're coming for with that. The next question I have heard a lot of. No one has ever asked me, which is good because I would, honestly, I might laugh at them. No offense to people who have this question. It's a valid question, but I hear it a lot and people always give the same answer. So we will give you that question and answer right now. When should I copyright or patent my board game? And the answer is really simple. Don't worry about it. The board game community is really kind of a small community. if someone is going to steal your idea, everyone's going to know about it.
Yeah.
And if you do have a concept that is unique, chances are you still won't be able to patent it anyway unless you have a literal mechanism or
like
mechanic.
my dial in the middle of the board
Right,
game.
exactly. Unless you have something that is in fact like mechanical, you won't be able to patent it anyway, because most board games, it's like trying to patent writing. I know I keep going back to board game design and writing are very similar, but like you can't patent a genre of writing because it's ideas. It's just ideas. And so really I would say the best way to make sure no one steals your idea, which is really where people are coming from, is to make your prototype as quickly as possible and to share it with people, which is not what people want to hear. They want to hear like, no, I want to keep it to myself. But by sharing it and letting people know that this is something that you're working on, it gets eyes on it and will get it in the popular consciousness quicker and make sure that other people will have your back if someone does want to take it.
Right. And there's a difference between copyright and patent and trademark.
Oh my god. Now we're getting into legal.
No. I'm going with, okay, the one exception I would give is there is such a thing as having, like, not, my game is great, but my game is great and I've got this character who's really cool.
Right.
Because in the end, the answer is that character could pop up in lots of things. That character could pop up in a video game later.
They're making Gloomhaven comics right now.
Wouldn't it be great if my character later pops up in a comic book? At the point in time where you're looking at this concept of that item being an IP, at that point, and only at that point, would you then start looking at these things.
Right. So, if you're watching this, chances are you are a first-time board game creator.
And you're not there.
And you're not there yet. If you are someone who has established games, call us, first of all. Very interested in working with you. Thank you for watching our content. But if you already are at that point, if you've been published and you have sort of a world building that you're doing, then maybe find a lawyer, talk to someone about it. But if you're a first-time game creator, you're watching this because you don't know what a prototype is, don't worry about it. It's fine. Talk to other game designers, share your game with them, let them play it, give you input, get it out there, and that will protect it, honestly. We got your back.
Yeah. The board game community's really tight and very inclusive, which means that
we're trying.
We try really hard. and which means that if we find out about someone who has stolen something,
put it on blast.
And it will blast through the community like crazy.
Yeah. Next is this is another one that I hear a lot. When should I look for art assets for my prototype? When do I go out and find nice looking art for my prototype? And there's two, okay, so there's looking for nice art, and then there's buying art. There's a lot of art that you can find that is free to use with accreditation, as long as you say, hey, I got this art from so-and-so, they have it up on their website, and it says that I can use it as long as I tell you that it's not mine. That's great. You can do that, I would say, at the end of beta, before you're ready to decide all of your things, but you want to show it to people and make it look a little bit nicer. Once everything is stable, going back to the idea of stability. Once it's stable, you can look for some nice free art to use to show it to people where you don't feel embarrassed about your ugly child board game. Don't pay for art yet. You're not there yet. You're not ready to copyright your game. You're not ready to pay for art yet. Whenever you think you're ready for art, give it another 3 months at least, because you don't want to pay for art, which you're gonna pay your artist, you're gonna pay them, and you're gonna pay them fairly, And so you don't want to spend a lot of money and then end up having something change and not need that art and have spent hundreds of dollars on it.
I'd say there's actually probably 3 levels of art.
What's the third one?
Well, there's the level where you're trying to just make it
Graphic
so that
icons that you have drawn really well. Yeah, I'm not. That's not really the question, but yeah, I agree.
So there's the one level where you're just trying to make it so that the people testing your game understand how to use the game. They're just like, I'm so confused. And you're just trying, so that's like the first level, and that's just you, and you just keep playing.
This is Carrie's stickers level, where she has bought stickers or
pretty stickers. Okay. And then the second level, which is what you're talking about, which is
free art assets.
I'm just gonna put these assets. They're right where they're gonna be in the end, but they're still just the free ones.
And they may change, but it's okay.
They may change. It's close. We're kind of happy with this.
It's okay because we haven't spent any money, so if we need to drop that for some reason...
Totally droppable.
No loss. And then there's the final tier, which is we have paid a lot of money for art because people have very high expectations about art with board games now that board games are very popular. And in, I think there was something like 10,000 games added to Board Game Geek last year or something, between new games and expansions. So like a ton of board games are being made. You don't want to waste your money on something that may not pan out, or even worse. Caveat here, if you are not planning on kickstarting, if you are planning on pitching to a publisher, do not spend any money on art. Don't do it. It is a waste of your time. Just don't do it. Help me help you. Don't buy art.
And they'll want to give new art anyway. You could pay lots of money on the art and they will get rid of the art and put whole new art on it anyway.
Remember how we said back in the concept episode how don't be married to your theme if you're planning on pitching to a publisher. Don't be married to your art if you're pitching to a publisher. I can't speak words. I feel very strongly about this. If you don't think they're gonna redo your theme, they're definitely not gonna redo your art.
So the one thing in the middle set is one thing that we both of us did is that sometimes some groups, like on internet groups that are art collectives, will have it where you pay like a one-time fee.
Yeah.
And then by doing that, you have limited use on all their assets.
Right. You can't resell it, but you can use it on
your stuff.
Your stuff.
Including commercially. Right. Usually you just have to be you have to kind of check it and be careful.
Yeah.
And so knowing that we were going to make lots of games and stuff, her and I have both bought into some of those.
Yeah. Buying an art pack for like $50 and then you can use all of these icons however you want. That's a good middle ground, and especially for things like that middle form, like you said, where you're putting things in specific places, but you don't want to be married to the art yet. That's a really good option. Is looking at that.
Right, especially since it was one-time cost, yes, but it was an investment in the future too. As in, we're not saying it's just this game is going to have these assets. No, I've bought these assets, and you or I can use it across all of our games.
Right. All right. So, art assets, I think the takeaway is you can always wait longer. Don't worry about it yet. Use your crappy scribbles for as long as humanly possible. You may want to rush ahead, but I would warn you that you may waste a lot of money that way. So thanks for joining us. Next time we're going to be talking about more questions that we were given about prototyping specifically. But the time after that, episode 4, we will be talking about playtesting, which is when you take your prototype and you play it to test it. It's a very confusing name, playtesting. But we'll talk about the different kinds of playtesting, whether it's guided or unguided. We'll also talk about trying to get the best information out of your playtesters so that you can upgrade your prototype and make it a better game. What kinds of questions to ask and how to word those questions to get the best information out of them. So if you have any questions about today's episode prototyping or about next time's episode playtesting, go ahead and comment below. Standard YouTube stuff like subscribe, all that good stuff. And let us know if you have anything that you want to know or if you have anything that we left out. Let us know.